Steve, welcome to WealthTalk.
Hi, Christian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Steve, our members within our 7 Steps to Wealth program will be familiar with you already from one of the guest expert webinars that you held for us last year. But it felt definitely overdue to get you onto the podcast and hear more about your business and how specifically you're working with business owners and property investors to leverage their time better. So would you mind introducing yourself and your business, please?
Yeah, so my name is Dr. Steve Day. I live in Sweden. I have a property business in the UK that I run remotely, and I also run the systems and outsourcing coaching business, which we help small business owners to outsource their work to virtual assistants all around the world to free them up to have more time to do whatever they want to do with their lives.
Yeah, fantastic. And we're talking today about how to use a virtual assistant to avoid overwhelm and take back control of your time. But perhaps a good place for us to begin is just to really demystify exactly what is a virtual assistant and why would someone need to think about employing one?
Yeah, quite simply, a virtual assistant in the way that I think about it is just anyone that's not you. So often people talk about VAs or virtual assistants as being someone based in the Philippines or maybe in India. And yeah, actually a lot of our staff do come from the Philippines, but also have a PA in the UK, and I call that an assistant. It's really anybody that you can delegate any of your work to as a business owner that isn't in direct employment under UK PAYE law. That is what I would define as a virtual assistant. So they may be abroad, but they may also be local to you or somewhere else in the UK. And I think the advantage of thinking about hiring virtual staff is there's a massive barrier for most people about taking on employees. There's a lot of red tape, there's the national insurance, there's employment law, and a lot of barriers to overcome, especially if it's the first time you're taking somebody on. And by using a contractor or a virtual assistant, it just removes huge amounts of that red tape and those barriers, because you're working with somebody on a more, I wouldn't say casual level, but because they are a contractor, then you're not bound by all of the headache that comes in the admin that comes with having a real employee, so to speak. And it makes it much easier then for you to get into actually starting trying out delegating your work and offloading it. And when you hire people from places like the Philippines, the cost of living over there is such that for really what is very, very affordable for us in somewhere like the UK, you can get highly educated, articulate, intelligent staff that you wouldn't simply be able to afford when you're starting out in business. So it can be a real win-win for them and for you as a new business owner.
Mm. And what were the circumstances, Steve, that led to you obviously getting into this field? And I guess there was a need in your own business for looking at a VA.
Yeah, by nature, I've always been a bit of a control freak and a micromanager. And I speak to hundreds of business owners, and I think that resonates with a lot of us, that you start a business, it's your baby, you want it done exactly the way you want it done. And the idea of letting go and getting somebody else to help you do the stuff that you've always done, that can be quite a barrier to people taking that leap. For me, I was sort of forced into it because my wife and I had a son, and she's Swedish, and she wanted to move back to Sweden to be near her family. So suddenly I had to figure out how to run my businesses remotely. And that started me on the journey that then found me employing, after a few different attempts at UK and India and South Africa and South America, I actually ended up employing my first full-time virtual assistant in the Philippines. And the ability to do so at a rate I could afford would allow me to start outsourcing more and more of my work. And then my business started to grow. And then from there, that's how I ended up talking to you today, really.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that is a big question for people, is where do they begin? Where do they go to look and try and find someone? So what would you suggest, Steve?
Yeah, if you're looking for somebody who's UK based, then there's a couple of good websites that I'd suggest. So Upwork and People Per Hour. Both of those, you simply put a job posting on there and people send their applications, and you can have a look through and pick someone that might be suitable. And there's a lot of checks in their security checks. They do ID checks, fraud checks. And so you've got a bit of a backup, if you like. So you're not just going out onto Craigslist or some other solicited way of actually finding somebody. And so you've got a bit of backup there. And then the one that we use is a Filipino-based website called onlinejobs.ph. And again, they've got those sort of ID checks and some other things in place to give you that little extra level of security or reassurance. And then you can just simply put your job posting on there and you'll get applicants for your job. So that's how we simply find people.
And I mean, many of our listeners, I'm sure, as you mentioned there, Steve, they have their own business, but perhaps they don't have any employees yet. So there's many admin tasks, I imagine. There's kind of repeatable tasks that we find ourselves doing every week or every month, and probably social media and things online. And all of these things, of course, require different skill sets. And we talk about wealth dynamics a lot within Wealth Builders community, and understanding what you're naturally good at. And that's where you should be focusing your time. And then obviously working with others or outsourcing those jobs that you don't enjoy, which other people, that's their thing. So, who should be the first what should be the first role that you should start to think about outsourcing in your business?
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the most common questions I get asked. And I think there's two ways to look at this, in that the simple answer to this is you need to know where you're currently spending your time. And as you alluded to, what you're good at and what you love doing and what you hate doing. So simply recording a list of everything you're doing every single day, as tedious as that may sound, is an incredibly valuable exercise to do. And then you can then, at the end of a week or a month, you can have a look and say, okay, well, where am I spending 20% of my time? Is it with emails? Is it with updating my website? Is it with general admin research or whatever it is? You'll see that is the first thing that if I just knock down that domino, if I just get rid of that one task, it will free up a huge chunk of my time. And if you think about outsourcing an hour a day, that's 6 weeks if you work it out over a year, or more than 6 weeks. If you work out, if you're 2 hours a day, 12 weeks, or 3 months by just getting rid of a couple of hours of your work a day. So knowing what you're doing is the first step. For most people, I would say you want to look at your admin, because that's the easiest stuff to outsource. As part of it is how much time is it taking you, but the second part is how difficult would it be to actually get somebody to do it for you. If you're an expert in something, that's going to be easier for you to train somebody else to do it. If you're new to something, like social media is one of the things that many people say, oh, I'll just get a VA or virtual assistant and they'll do my social media for me. Doing social media is not a single activity. It's a skill set. It takes experience and knowledge and various skills, copywriting, graphic design, scheduling. There's a lot of work involved in actually doing that. So if you knew that, if you're an expert at it, you'd know the things you needed to put in place to get somebody to help you. But if it's not, and you're just saying, oh, well, everyone else is doing it, I need to do that, then what you'll do is open up a can of worms. And you'll try and bring in someone to help you and think that's going to grow my business. But because you actually don't know the task yourself already, or you're not an expert, it can then lead you into thinking that we're using virtual assistants doesn't work, because you can't get this person to do what you want them to do, but you never really knew what it was in the first place. So really, just to summarize that, you start with the stuff that you already know you're already doing, because that's easier to outsource. And also it then free up your time to focus on other stuff. And I'd say that in the first instance, start with admin tasks, because they're the easiest to, typically they're more recurring. So therefore getting someone to do something requires less input from you, less training, because you can train them once and let them get on with it. And just, you touched on wealth dynamics before. So we actually, in our recruitment process, we have a fully systemized recruitment process. But part of that is actually asking them what is their wealth dynamics profile. So we use the free version of the test. So the I think it's the Genius U. I can't remember the URL off the top of my head, but it's the free version of the wealth dynamics. Just gives you the 4 energy levels and or the 4 energy types. And we go for steel for our admin, and that's been actually pretty indicative of will they be able to do the job regardless of what they say on any application form. If they have a blaze, if they're a dynamo, and we bring them into an admin role, they don't work. They may work for a month, but they don't last, because it's not their flow. It'll drain them and they'll never stick to it, because it's not what they're actually good at.
Yeah. Well, I know from obviously going through your program, Steve, that it's very, very well laid out, and there's so many things actually you wouldn't think about. So I know when I fell into the trap probably 4 or 5 years ago, employing my first virtual assistant, and I didn't really know what to give them, and then it can become a bit stressful because they're kind of asking you, okay, what do you want me to do next? And if you haven't kind of got a system in place at the beginning, then it can get tricky. So I would definitely recommend anyone thinking about it to to follow some of the procedures that you share in your program, and lots of free information online as well. But one of the very useful things you mentioned there about time tracking, there was a tool which you suggested called Toggle, TOGGL, I think, .com. Yep. And it was fascinating when I actually spent a couple of weeks really tracking everything that I was doing, and just realized, so much of that could easily be done by someone else, even though we do use virtual assistants at the moment. But just by tracking it, it's amazing what you can overlook. Yeah.
Definitely.
And the other aspect I think a lot of people have, Steve, is the trust element. As you say, it's your baby, your business, and you've got a lot of hard work and energy that's gone into building that up. And how do you deal with that? And how does someone, know that their information is safe in the hands of a virtual assistant?
Yeah, again, really common question, and got a lot of empathy for this because, as I said before, I definitely been a micromanager and a control freak for many years, and for me, I think the hardest thing is two elements. One you touched on is the sort of data protection security aspect. But another one, I think for me, actually, my bigger worry was, will they do the work to a good enough standard? Or will I just end up having to do it all myself anyway and repeat it all again? Or it'll go out to the public or to a client and it just won't be of a high enough standard. And so the first of those, so the quality level, the way that I found to get around that, and this is what we teach now, is a systemized approach to doing this, is rather than trying to just get someone to do something and just asking them, or can you go away and do me some research, or can you go away and do this task for me, record yourself doing the task. And this goes back to, again, what is it you're doing right now that you're going to outsource? Because that way, the next time you do that task, you stick record, we recommend Screencast-O-Matic. It's the cheapest and best screen recorder and editor out there for small businesses, in my opinion, and I've tested and tried a lot. Definitely cheaper than Loom. I know a lot of people like Loom, but there you go. And I'm not affiliated with them, by the way. And so you record your screen doing the task anyway. It takes you no more time than it would have taken you to do in the first place, because it's just work you're doing. We do recommend you add a bit of detail in there and narrate yourself over it to give them a bit more depth into what you're doing. Send that to them, and that is there in a simple form, their operation manual. So they now are doing or just copying what you were doing when you did the task. So suddenly their work is as good as yours, and actually often better, because when you were rushed and doing three or 10 different things at once, and phone goes and you've got a crisis in your business, they're just focused on that one thing you'd asked them to do, and it's their job to get that done perfectly. So actually the quality aspect, that fear for me was totally misplaced once I'd figured out how to effectively outsource my work. So that's probably one of the biggest golden nuggets I've figured out along the way. And the second part was about the trust from a security point of view, and you've got to be conscious with anyone you're employing about security. It shouldn't really matter where they are in the world from some respects. So if somebody's going to run off and steal some information from your data, doesn't matter if they're based in the UK or abroad, it could still happen. So you've got to be savvy anyway. But if you're working abroad, there's that extra fear that you've not got that protection of, say, the UK legal system behind you, and they've got the recourse of going down that route if something was to happen. And if somebody's a professional personal assistant, for example, in the UK, and they've got a company, it's unlikely they're going to steal 20 quid from you because it's going to potentially ruin their business. So when you're working with someone from abroad, those fears can come back, because it's hard to know. So you've got to put things in place to make sure that you're not sharing your data, for example, in a way that could be abused easily. So I have a UK PA that deals with my banking for me. So she basically makes all my payments for me. We have prepaid cards to limit my liability. She's a user on my business account, so she can't make payments or steal money from me, but she can set up payments. She can access my bank records, so she can do my bookkeeping. But then she gives enough access to do her job, but then putting things in place to make sure she can't, I don't think she ever would, but the security is there, so she couldn't, even if she wanted to, do anything really bad. And then with GDPR, people often ask me about that and data protection. So you've got to put sensible steps in place to protect other people's data as well. But those can be just doing an audit. So GDPR is all about really, have you actually thought about the security of your data? Do you have simple things in place like passwords, good, strong passwords? Do you use virtual private networks, for example? So that's when you encrypt all the data that you're sending from your computer, so you can get your staff to use those as well. So when they're logging into anything with client emails, for example, they could use a virtual private network or a VPN to then add that level of security. And then be very sensible about who you give access to what. Don't blanket give everyone access to everything. Know who has access to sensitive information, and then make sure you're just keeping an eye on who's doing what with it. Another simple way for protecting yourself: switch on two-step authentication onto anything that has any significance to your business, and that way you'll know when someone tries to log into it. They can always you can always give them access, because you can just get on a call and just give them the number, or they can ping a message saying, I'm about to log into your X account because I need to do Y. Can you just give me the code when it comes to your phone? But then that gives you that security. You know when people are accessing those specific sites. So those are some of the techniques I've used to allay my fears of who's getting what's in my business. So yeah,
no, that's very helpful. Thank you, Steve. So we've talked about where to find someone. We've talked about obviously some of the privacy challenges or worries there that people might have. We've covered some of the tech. You've already given us some really good tips on some of the tech and software that you use as well to make the whole process easier. Is there anything else that holds people back from just taking that first step and actually giving it a go, Steve?
Probably, again, I would say the tech challenge. So we ask everybody that comes in our Facebook group, so Systems and Outsourcing Facebook group, if you're interested, we ask them what their biggest challenges are with systems and outsourcing. And tech comes up a lot. So I've given you a couple of examples of a few apps for screen recording and things, but there's how do you share your files and folders with somebody? How do you collaborate online? How do you manage someone on the other side of the planet? So you need effective tools to do all that. And so we recommend, so just whittle through them. So we recommend Asana for task management. It's because the free version is so good and it also can scale. There are others out there that are probably equally good, but their free versions aren't as good. So for people just getting started, it means you can really get set up and going before you need to dip your hand in your pocket. We use Google. Again, it's free to get started. It gives you a full suite of apps, much easier to manage than Microsoft, and it's got brilliant business level grade solutions when you're ready again to go up. I mentioned Screencast-O-Matic as well, and another one is LastPass. So LastPass allows you to share logins with people really conveniently. I always say this when I'm doing any interviews, whatever. LastPass is not secure. If you share a password through LastPass, anyone on that receiving end can view that password. If you don't believe me, just next time you log into Google and you put your password in, there's a little button on the right hand side which says show password. So if you share that password via LastPass or any other password sharing app and they hit that button, they'll be able to read your password. So it's convenient. It's not a secure thing to do, but it's still really powerful and really useful for reducing the headaches. So having the knowledge of which apps work and which integrate together well is really important. But then actually knowing how to use them is one of the biggest barriers. So getting started with these apps is often a minefield for people. You open up Asana for the first time and you'll be like, I have no idea where to turn. So having a structure to actually how you use them. So come onto our Facebook group and there's loads of information on how you do this. So for example, using task boards to manage your staff. So delegating work out on a task board gives you full visibility about what someone's working on now, in the future, and what they're going to work on next. Allows you to communicate with your team without relying on email and getting caught up in threads, and gives you a really clear way to actually to work effectively with a remote team. So having that knowledge as well is probably what holds a lot of people back, because they just get a bit sort of like the rabbit in the headlights and too many choices and too many possibilities and not enough knowledge. And so overcoming that, once they get that, then often they go and get going with it and just crack on.
Yeah, Yeah, Asana is absolutely a game changer, and I'll give Adnan a shout out, who's a Wealth Builders member who absolutely loves Asana as well. So yeah, and again, going through your program, Steve, I changed the way that I use Asana now because I was not using the task boards in the way that you had shown me to do so, and it's really, really made such a big impact. So thank you for that.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
So it's been so useful and helpful listening to everything that you've mentioned, Steve. I guess the final question is, when should someone start thinking about this? When is the right time?
Yeah. And again, funnily enough, this is, again, one of the questions that comes up most often when I'm speaking to people. There's this problem with us business people is that we normally only look for solutions when the pain gets so bad that we can't bear it any longer. With this is a great example of when the worst thing to do is wait until you desperately need to start outsourcing to actually start outsourcing. Because when you learn any new task, any new skill, when you try to adopt a new process or procedures or learn new apps, all of that takes up time. And unfortunately, when you're trying to build a business and you're trying to grow a team of people, even if it's just one part-time staff, you need to understand how to work effectively with them. Otherwise, it just won't work. So getting all of these basic things set up, so some basic apps, it can be pretty simple, but basic stuff, but get it done. Start finding somebody, looking abroad, gauging how that's going to work, how long it might take you to find the right person for you, and then actually just trialing somebody out. Start an hour a week. It doesn't matter. The fact is you've then gone through the process once. You're then learning by actually implementing and doing. And therefore that when you do get to that point when you need it, you've not got to figure all of that stuff out and put it all in place at a time when you're desperate. I mean, that's the reason you're going out looking for this new superstar VA who's going to cure all your problems, which unfortunately I would say that is also the wrong approach. But just when you get to that point and you desperately need it, you don't want to be then figuring this all out. So my advice always is start as early as you possibly can in just learning the basics. You don't need to take on somebody and hire them for a full-time basis if you're just getting started and you've got hardly any money coming in or just not enough work to justify that. So do it sensibly, but it's about getting everything, for a cliche phrase, getting your ducks in a row before you actually need that is a huge benefit. And I can't emphasize that enough. This stuff isn't rocket science, but it also requires some work to get done right. And I just say one other thing, which I think that I experienced this myself, but I've seen it so often with my clients that maybe they've resistance to just getting that first engagement with the virtual assistant. And this is even with my help, giving them all the systems and all the setup. They're there, it's ready. Literally all they have to do is switch a button and they'll have that person there. And they push back for some reason. There's some fear inside them that I can't quite get over. And then finally they do it. And the difference is that once you've got somebody on the other end of a task management app or an email or whatever, is that they're then there. So the next time you come up with an idea for a task or you hit a problem, maybe you need to tidy up a spreadsheet. Maybe you've got 50 updates to your website you need to do. They're all really repetitive. Maybe doing some property research, some sourcing, looking at Rightmove, finding 50 properties in a local area to find out if the property is going to stack up for the deal. Suddenly you go, hold on a minute, this is going to take me about 4 hours to do. Why don't I just shift this task over to somebody else? Oh, that's good, because I've got somebody in the wings waiting for me to give them work. And once you've done that once, you get that feeling of knowing, for example, the first thing I ever outsourced was looking for properties on Rightmove and going through finding 10 properties, 10 one-bedroom flats, 10 two-bedroom flats for like 3 or 4 different postcodes. I was doing that day in, day out, looking for properties. And I got rid of that as my first ever proper task that I outsourced. When that came back, done as good, if not better than I would have done it, it was like a light bulb went off in my brain. Like I will never, ever do that again. And now I can focus all my efforts on the next step in that buying deal analysis process. And then the snowball happens because suddenly you start thinking, okay, well, which part can I outsource next? And it's addictive and you just basically frees you up entirely to focus on the stuff that you love to do each day rather than doing all that admin and boring stuff that drags most of us down.
I imagine most of our people, listeners right now, Steve, have at least got 2 or 3 hours per week of something that they could begin outsourcing. So
Absolutely.
I think that's great advice. And remind us once again, Steve, of the Facebook group if people want to go and check out and connect with you.
Yeah, so it's just systems and outsourcing.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing today, Steve. Good to have you on Wealth Talk.
My pleasure. Cheers, Christian. Thank you.